Welcome back to Composition and Its Allies. My name is Barney. I'm a classical composer, and this is a channel for composers as well as performers interested in composition. Fugue for composers is for anyone who wants to finish their first fugue, right? When it comes to fugue, I think there are two blocks for composers. First and foremost, there may be certain harmonic technical skills that you absolutely need that if you do not have, for example, with modulations, it's just not going to be possible to finish the fugue from start to finish because the hardest battle with fugue is the management of keys. Another thing that concerns me is the propaganda. What's the propaganda? So there is a lot of misinformation about fugue. There is a big discrepancy between an actual fugue and fugue that you do in school. You can't do this, you can't do that. There's teachers, there's colleagues, there's well-meaning people. They're all telling you what you can and can't do. And so when you go to compose the fugue, you find there's these voices in your head kind of directing you and you feel stuck and then you don't finish the fugue. So if you are committed and you want to make it happen and you're willing to get the necessary knowledge when it comes to harmony and you're just going to power through it and you want to battle those voices, then this video is specifically for you. Now, I'd like to focus on the difference between a boring fugue that is going to meet the expectations of the naysayers in your head and composing a fugue that actually says something. Let's begin. Let's start with the exposition. So this is a fugue from my opera ballet Salambo. It's called The Return of Hamilcar for children's chorus. And first thing you got to think about, so children's chorus, what does that mean? That means that the subject is very, very restrictive because the children, first of all, they don't have technical polish yet, so they can't do a lot of technical things, maybe. But there's also a physical limitation to the range. So it's going to present a lot of difficulty, but a lot of opportunity when it comes to fugue. So a fugue is a puzzle. It's something super exciting, and I think you should embrace any of the challenges that come along the way. Let me sing my subject. Hamilcar va venir, va venir, Hamilcar va venir. All right, so notice that this is a modulating subject, okay? So it goes from F sharp minor to A major. Now, when I settled on this subject, two things I want to bring to your attention. First and foremost is you have to say no to the propaganda, which I talked about not too long ago. So what's the propaganda? I specifically remember when I was in fugue school in France, having subjects that I really liked or really loved, and the teacher saying, "Non, c'est pas possible, c'est pas sage, c'est pas le bon moment," basically giving you reasons that you can't do this particular subject. Now, maybe you don't have the technical ability in terms of harmony, but then you got to tell me what those skills are so I can actually get them. So in this fugue, I decided, no, this is what I want. Okay, I like how it modulates. I'm not going to avoid it just because it might be difficult. Another thing I did is so when I got to A major, so that's the relative of F sharp minor, obviously my response is going to have to go from A major back to F sharp minor. What did I do? I took the morphine. What's the morphine? The morphine is going back to Bach. Okay, well, how did Bach figure this out? Okay, and so what I did is I stopped my composition session. I was in flow and I stopped it to go rush over to see Bach, lose all that flow that was built in, and then the more I flip through Bach, I'm rushed and stressed and, lose my happy state, shall we say. But more importantly, I discovered that Bach never had a subject, at least within the well-tempered clavier, that modulates between the relative. He has plenty that modulate between tonic and dominant, but not between the relative. So what I highly recommend is when you're composing your fugue is stay in the flow, finish it off, and figure it out for yourself. Figure out a solution. That's where your ingenuity as a composer is going to manifest, is you have this difficult thing, or maybe there's certain deficiencies in your harmonic understanding, but you still find a way. Then once you've figured it out, then you can schedule a limited study session, maybe 20 minutes, you don't lose too much time for other things, and see how Bach or someone else would have figured it out. The next thing I want to bring your attention to is the pacing of harmonic change. So Hamilcar. So harmony is most likely going to be changing. The most it could possibly be probably every half note, okay, but maybe even every whole note, okay. Something to think about when you're going to be harmonizing other keys, but you'll figure it out as you go. With Fugue, I'd have to say there's a combination of really hyper good planning, okay? And I think part of the reason why we plan is not because we're going to follow through with the plan. It's just it gets us familiar with the fugue, okay? Because with the subject, I don't know all the tendencies, all the implications right away. Maybe the more fugues I compose, I will know right away. Okay, this subject can do stretto, this, but you just have to do a lot of planning, but then you also have to improvise as you go. Okay, so it's a balance of the two. Next thing I want to bring your attention to is the danger of exact transposition. So at the ending of the subject, when we go into A major, all right, so we go from F sharp minor and we get into A major, versus in the equivalent section in the response, there are some differences. So notice with the first version, the subject, there is a whole step from the Amilcar to the Va. Versus in the response, okay, we have a leap of a third. Another difference that we have is in the subject. Notice how we're dancing around the tonic. Okay, the new tonic in A major, but in the equivalent moment in the response, instead we're basically descending to the tonic. Now this actually makes perfect sense, right? Because you're moving up a third in the scale, okay, F sharp minor to A major, and then though the subject isn't changing, the response isn't changing, you got to go back, right? You don't want to keep moving through keys, you want to get back. So it makes sense that there's some kind of mutation. So I bring this to your attention because I definitely remember in a lot of fugue school, there's this emphasis on exact, okay? It has to be pure, okay? But what's pure on paper is not going to sound good for the ear. And when I was doing the sketches, certainly I looked at my default would have been like exact transposition. Can I make it? And I didn't like how it looked. Maybe I'll show that in another video. So I had to think as a composer, and how can I adapt this idea? First of all, it needs to sound good, okay? I didn't like how it sounded. Okay, that's one of the dangers when you have a modulating subject. But another practical reason is I have to get back to F sharp minor. So I had to try a couple different mutations, and that was the best one I found. And I don't think if I hadn't pointed out, you probably wouldn't have noticed right away. So when you're composing your fugue, maybe you're going to have to do a mutation, but be wary of the kind of the knowledge kind of tyranny. So what I have right here is Traité de la Fugue de Guedalge. It's an absolute and utter monster of a text. Okay, it's basically an encyclopedia. It was written at a time where we didn't have the internet and we needed like knowledge like saved in one document so teachers can pull from it, students can refer to it on their own time. But times have moved on, and I find sometimes we get obsessed. Like when I was in Paris, I bought that book and I just tried to read through it, hoping I would get the knowledge, and it was just I think I lost a lot of valuable time. You have to focus on composing the fugue. I'm sure at this point, if you're watching this video, you have spent many, many, many years trying to get that knowledge, doing the counterpoint studies, doing all the preparatory studies. At a certain point, you have to put the knowledge, the research in a really small box, okay? Maybe 5% of your available musical time, shall we say, and the rest has to go into your actual fugue. I'm not going to talk much about the divertissement because I want to save that for another tutorial video, because I know a number of you have told me that you have a lot of difficulty when it comes to the divertissement and the sequences. I will mention that on my website I have a quiz on modulations, and I also have a document for practicing modulating sequences, so that might hopefully stave you over until the next video. But keep in mind, you can't rely on one person to get you to the fugue. This is just to help motivate you. You gotta do the fugue, you gotta do the fugue, you gotta do the fugue, okay? That's the hard part, is actually doing the fugue, all right? But what I will say about the divertissement, notice that it is quicker pace. So, oh my goodness, you can't do that, right? The fugue propaganda, Okay, definitely if I was doing fugue in the 18th century style, you got to sing one time signature, you can't change it up. But this is your fugue, and there's a practical reason I had to change it up because the fugue is rather slow moving, very steady. Right? By the time I get to the ending of the second entrance, the listener is losing interest, right? It has to pick up the pace. There's a compositional reason why my divertissement is moving much quicker. So when you encounter these things, there's a conflict between what you're supposed to do and what you actually want to do as a composer. Obviously, you have to do what you want as a composer. It's your piece. You are the emperor. You are in charge. Okay? Do not believe the propaganda, and the propaganda is already in your head. It's these little voices saying what you can and cannot do. Why can't you do it? What is the good reason? There is no good reason except the convention of what Bach would have done, but you're composing your own piece of music. This is composition. This is no longer study. All right, so I have the divertissement. Notice how it ends. So notice that I'm still in the exposition, but I'm now in the subdominant. Why would that be? Well, there are a couple practical reasons. First and foremost, this is a fugue for children's chorus, so the children have a very restricted range, and usually would go back to the tonic for the third entrance, but I have nowhere to go. I can't put up the octave. That'd be very unreasonable. Certainly can't put it down the octave, and I wouldn't want to repeat the subject in the same register. So because of that, I had to move to the subdominant. Another reason, for the same reason we talked about, we've already had maybe 60 seconds of the exposition, maybe even longer. We have a divertissement that is accordingly a certain length because you need good proportions for your fugue. So by the time we get to this measure 20, on the épuisé, as it's in French, we're exhausted, we're done with F sharp minor. So this is another reason why you do quality studies in harmony, because you want to have an ear that can sense that and can actually compose. And of course, you need to be able to transpose, but that's not that big of an issue. I think all of us can do that. It's just a little bit laborious. Notice as well, okay, so it's coming in another voice, but notice what's going on beneath it. So I have this floating, kind of fast-moving kind of accompaniment. And part of the reason, of course, is that in the subject for the first part, there was no accompaniment, so I have to create a new accompaniment. And many times we're going to use the counter subject, but generally what I find is the counter subject isn't always going to work, okay? So in this particular fugue, since it's modulating, when I'm in the relative section, okay, let's go back to that first page, I did have a counter subject, salambo, salambo, contrasting kind of feel, but that counter subject only works for me in the relative section of when the subject or response is playing. So when I'm back to the subject, it no longer works. So you got to be flexible with that, and you got to be willing to create something new. Another reason I have this fast-moving line, right, is because the listener is getting fatigued. I need to keep the motion going. So when it comes to fugues, even with Bach, I find sometimes it's a bit laborious for the ear. It's a little too steady, too regular. Could be the performance, or it could be that some of the fugues are really more pedagogical, but nevertheless, I'm composing a fugue for a public that's going to hear it. I want it to be enjoyable. So you got to be attuned, thinking as a composer, when you have to kind of jazz things up, maybe in future video I'll talk about as well. Later in this fugue, I actually do a variation on the subject itself, because that need to innovate becomes so important, because otherwise people are at any second you could lose the interest. Keep in mind that fugue is very difficult to listen to, plus you need good performers, okay, who can interpret it well. So you got to make sure, baked into the compositional process, you're thinking about the enjoyment of the fugue. One final thing I want to mention is changing up the harmony. All right, so notice that we kind of have a stepwise bass, shall we say. So it's in the soprano 3. And this harmony is probably going to be different later in the fugue. So something important you have to be able to do, and this comes from studies in the French style, hearing above and below, is you want to be able to change the harmony. So even though in a previous section of the subject of response you harmony one way, you want the listener to still be engaged. So you got to think about like what is the new harmony. Everything is always fresh in a fugue. That first comes from the choice of keys, but that's for another episode. That's all I want to share today. I hope that just motivates you to finish your fugue. So please shut off YouTube and go ahead and compose your fugue. Don't let anyone stop you. If you've already worked on your fugue today and you just want to hang out a little bit, then you can check out some of the other fugue videos I have here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.